He thought buying a rundown ski chalet for $85,000 would give his grieving daughter a fresh start. But when he found the hidden tunnel beneath the kitchen floor, it led to $350 million in gold, art, and secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The mountain air bit cold and sharp as Marcus Holloway pulled his pickup truck up the winding gravel road. His 8-year-old daughter Sophie pressed against the window in the back seat, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at the towering pines. It had been 2 years since the accident, 2 years since Emily died on a rain-slicked highway coming home from her nursing shift, 2 years of Marcus waking up in an empty bed wondering how he was supposed to raise a little girl alone when he could barely get himself out of bed most mornings. The insurance money had sat in an account for months, untouched, sacred almost, like spending it would erase the last piece of Emily he had left. But Sophie needed more than a grieving father stumbling through life in their cramped Denver apartment. She needed space to breathe, to heal, to remember her mother without every corner holding a ghost. So when Marcus saw the listing for a 1970s ski chalet in the remote mountains outside Crested Butte, Colorado, something shifted in his chest. The photos showed a 2-story A-frame with floor-to-ceiling windows, a stone fireplace, and wraparound deck overlooking endless pine forests. The price was almost too good to believe, $85,000. The listing was honest about the problems, needed extensive repairs, outdated electrical, plumbing issues, sold as is. Most people saw a money pit. Marcus, a carpenter and contractor by trade, saw possibility. His friends told him he was crazy. Rachel, Emily's best friend and the closest thing Sophie had to an aunt, sat him down over coffee and said gently, "Marcus, you're running. And I get it, I do, but a broken-down house in the middle of nowhere isn't going to fix what's broken inside." He'd looked at her with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Maybe not. But staying here is killing us both." So he'd signed the papers, loaded everything they owned into a U-Haul, and driven 4 hours into the mountains toward a future he couldn't see, but desperately needed to believe in. The chalet appeared through the trees like something from a postcard, all rustic wood and stone, windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. Sophie gasped, "Daddy, it's like a castle." Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. "Yeah, baby, it kind of is." They climbed out of the truck, boots crunching on gravel and frost. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke from a distant cabin. The silence was so thick it felt like a presence, not empty, but full of something Marcus couldn't name yet. He unlocked the front door, the key turning stiffly in the old lock, and they stepped inside. The interior was bigger than the photos suggested. The main room soared 2 stories high, exposed beams crisscrossing overhead. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, soot-stained and cold. Dust covered everything, furniture left behind by the previous owner draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. Sophie ran to the windows, her small hands pressed against the glass. "Can we see Mom from here?" she asked quietly. Marcus's throat tightened. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "In heaven," she said, still looking out at the mountains. "Is heaven up there past the clouds?" He knelt beside her, his voice breaking just slightly. "Yeah, baby, I think it is, and I bet she can see us just fine from there." That night, after they'd unpacked the basics and made grilled cheese sandwiches on the ancient gas stove, Marcus tucked Sophie into her new room upstairs. It was small but cozy, with a window seat overlooking the forest. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one Emily had given her for her 5th birthday, and looked up at him with those same green eyes her mother had. "Daddy, do you think Mom would like it here?" Marcus brushed hair from her forehead. "I think she'd love it, Soph. I think she'd love that we're trying to be happy again." After she fell asleep, Marcus wandered the dark house with a flashlight, checking the bones of the place like a doctor examining a patient. The floors were solid, the foundation good despite some settling. The electrical panel was a mess, and the plumbing groaned when he turned on faucets, but nothing he couldn't handle given time and money, both of which were in short supply. He made his way down to the basement, a damp, stone-walled space that smelled like earth and age. The basement was unfinished, with exposed stone walls and a concrete floor that had cracked over the decades. Wooden shelves lined one wall, holding paint cans and rusted tools left behind like archaeological artifacts. A water heater hummed in the corner, older than Sophie probably. Marcus swept his flashlight across the space methodically, making mental notes of what needed replacing, what could be salvaged. That's when he saw it. In the far corner, partially hidden behind an old workbench, was a door. Not a modern door, but heavy wood reinforced with iron brackets, the kind you'd find in a medieval castle or a bank vault. His pulse quickened. He approached slowly, boots scraping against concrete. The door had no handle, just a keyhole, old-fashioned and ornate. He tried pushing it, solid as stone. He pulled. Nothing. It hadn't been mentioned in the sale documents, hadn't appeared in any photos. Marcus ran his hand along the frame, feeling the cold metal, the ancient wood. Why would someone build a door like this in a basement? And where did it lead? He spent the next hour searching for a key, going through every drawer, every toolbox, every dusty corner of the house. Nothing. By midnight, exhausted, he climbed the stairs and collapsed into bed in the master bedroom, Emily's photo on the nightstand catching moonlight. "What did I get us into?" he whispered to her image. The house creaked and settled around him, and somewhere deep below he could have sworn he heard a sound like metal shifting, like something waiting. The next morning, Marcus woke to Sophie jumping on his bed, her enthusiasm a sharp contrast to the heavy exhaustion weighing on his bones. "Daddy! Daddy! There's a deer outside, a whole family!" He forced his eyes open, muscles aching from yesterday's drive and the stress of the move. "That's great, baby. Let me make some coffee first." They spent the morning unpacking, turning the hollow shell of a house into something resembling a home. Sophie arranged her stuffed animals on her window seat, while Marcus hung Emily's paintings, small watercolors she'd done in the early years of their marriage, before nursing school consumed her time. Each brushstroke felt like a conversation he'd never get to finish. Around noon, while Sophie colored at the kitchen table, Marcus returned to the basement. The locked door pulled at him like gravity. He'd always been good with his hands, good at solving problems. But this felt different. This felt like a mystery someone had intentionally sealed away. He examined the lock more closely in the daylight filtering through a high window. It was intricate. European, maybe. Definitely old. 19th century, if he had to guess. The keyhole was shaped like a cross, unusual and specific. This wasn't something you picked with a bobby pin. He pulled out his phone, snapped a photo, and texted it to his buddy Tyler, a locksmith in Denver. "Any idea what kind of lock this is?" The reply came 20 minutes later. "Where the hell did you find that? That's a German vault lock, probably 1800s. You're not opening that without the original key or a blowtorch, man." Marcus stared at his phone, then back at the door. A vault lock. In a ski chalet basement. In the middle of Colorado. Nothing about that made sense. He spent the rest of the day working on surface repairs, replacing broken window seals, patching drywall, keeping his hands busy while his mind churned. Sophie helped him paint her bedroom a soft purple she'd picked out, chattering about the new school she'd start next week, about whether they could get a dog now that they had a yard. "Maybe, Soph," he said, rolling paint across the wall. "Let's get settled first." But his thoughts kept drifting back to that door. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a beer and the folder of documents from the house sale. He flipped through them slowly. Deed, title insurance, disclosure forms. The previous owner was listed as Edmund Castellano, deceased. The property had been sold by the estate. No heirs mentioned, no family. just a lawyer's office in Denver handling the liquidation. He Googled the name, Edmund Castellano. Nothing remarkable came up. An obituary from 6 months ago. Edmund Castellano, 89, passed peacefully in his sleep, no services planned, no surviving family. That was it. No mention of a career, hobbies, or why an 89-year-old man had been living alone in a remote mountain chalet. Marcus dug deeper, searching property records, old news archives, anything. Most searches came up empty. But then he found something. A tiny article from a 1958 edition of the Crested Butte Gazette. Local resident Edmund Castellano opens art gallery featuring European antiquities. An art gallery. Marcus sat back, wheels turning. European antiquities, a German vault lock, a hidden door. He stood up, suddenly energized, and went to the living room. The previous owner had left behind some furniture, books lining built-in shelves. Marcus started pulling them down one by one, checking inside covers, shaking out pages. Most were unremarkable. Detective novels, encyclopedias, coffee table books about the Rockies. Then, tucked between 2 thick volumes about World War II, he found a small leather-bound journal. His hands trembled as he opened it. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. The first entry was dated March 1947. I have arrived in America with what I could carry. The rest is buried until the world remembers what was stolen. Marcus's heart pounded. He flipped through more pages. Cryptic entries about the collection, about keeping them safe, about waiting for the right time. And then, near the back, a loose photograph slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Marcus picked it up. It showed a younger Edmund, maybe in his 30s, standing in front of what looked like a European cathedral. He was holding a painting, ornate frame visible even in the black and white image. And behind him, barely visible, was a Nazi flag hanging from a building in the background. Marcus's blood ran cold. What the hell had he bought? The photograph burned in Marcus's hand like evidence of a crime he hadn't committed yet. He stared at Edmund's young face, frozen in time decades ago, holding that painting with what looked like pride or maybe desperation. The Nazi flag in the background could mean anything or nothing. Europe after the war was chaos, occupied territories, displaced people, stolen art making its way through black markets like ghosts searching for home. He sat back down at the kitchen table and opened his laptop, fingers moving before his brain caught up. He typed, Nazi stolen art, World War II, art recovery. The search results exploded across his screen. Thousands of pieces, entire museums worth of paintings, sculptures, religious artifacts, gold, jewels, taken from Jewish families, museums, churches across Europe. Some recovered, most still missing. He clicked on a database maintained by international organizations tracking looted art. Page after page of images, Rembrandts, Klimts, Vermeers, each with a red stamp, missing since 1942 or looted 1943, whereabouts unknown. Marcus's stomach twisted. If Edmund had been involved in hiding or transporting stolen art, if that's what was behind the locked door, then Marcus wasn't just sitting on a valuable discovery. He was sitting on someone's stolen legacy, on history that belonged to families who'd been murdered for it. He couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that door, imagined what might be behind it. Gold bars stacked like bricks, paintings wrapped in canvas, artifacts that museums had been searching for since before his parents were born. Or maybe nothing. Maybe just an old man's wine cellar or storage space for junk. But the lock said otherwise. The journal said otherwise. By dawn, Marcus had made a decision. He needed that key. He spent the next 3 days searching every inch of the house. He pulled up loose floorboards, checked behind baseboards, emptied every drawer, every closet, every cabinet. Sophie thought it was a game, helping him look for treasure, not understanding that what her father feared finding might not be treasure at all. On the 4th day, while replacing a broken light fixture in the master bedroom, Marcus noticed something odd. The closet, originally built into the wall, didn't match the dimensions from the outside. He knocked on the back panel, hollow. His pulse quickened. He felt along the edges until he found a seam, barely visible. He pressed, and a small panel popped open. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, locked with a combination dial. He brought it downstairs, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it. Sophie was at her new school, her first week going better than he'd hoped. She'd made a friend named Lily. They were going to have a play date this weekend. Normal things, safe things. This box was not safe. Marcus tried his birthday, Emily's birthday, Sophie's. Nothing. He tried the year the house was built, 1973. Nothing. Then, on instinct, he tried the year from the journal's first entry, 1947. Click. The box opened. Inside, wrapped in velvet cloth, was a key, heavy iron with a cross-shaped end, and beneath it, a letter. Marcus's hands shook as he unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting matched the journal. To whoever finds this, I am old now, and my time is short. What lies beneath this house is not mine, but I have protected it for 70 years because the world was not ready. Perhaps it still isn't. These items were saved from destruction, from being melted down or destroyed by men who saw only their monetary value, not their soul. I could not return them myself without risking everything I built here, without bringing attention that would destroy me and what I protected. If you have found this key, you have a choice. Wealth beyond measure waits below. Take it and live in luxury, or do what I could not. Return what was stolen to those it was stolen from. The choice has always been about integrity, not gold. Choose wisely. Edmund Castellano. Marcus read the letter 3 times, each word heavier than the last. He wasn't just holding a key to a locked door. He was holding a moral decision that would define not just his life, but Sophie's. The money could change everything. Pay off the medical debt from Emily's final hospital stay. Fund Sophie's college, her future. Give them security he'd never known. But at what cost? He looked at Emily's photo on the mantel, her smile frozen in time, taken at Sophie's 5th birthday party weeks before the accident. Emily had been a nurse because she believed in helping people, even when it meant working double shifts, even when it meant missing dinners and soccer games. She'd chosen purpose over comfort every time. "What would you do?" he whispered to her image. He already knew the answer. That afternoon, Marcus waited until after he'd picked Sophie up from school, after they'd had their snack of apple slices and peanut butter, after she'd settled into homework at the kitchen table. He stood at the top of the basement stairs, the key in his pocket, feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm going to work on some stuff downstairs, Soph," he called. "You okay up here?" "Uh-huh," she answered without looking up from her math worksheet. He descended the stairs, each step deliberate. The basement was cold, the single bulb casting harsh shadows. He approached the door, pulled out the key and held it up to the lock. The cross-shaped end aligned perfectly. He took a breath, inserted the key, and turned. The lock released with a heavy clunk that echoed through the stone space. The door swung inward slowly, hinges groaning with decades of disuse. Cold air rushed out, stale and dry, carrying the scent of earth and something else. Old paper, metal, time. Beyond the door, stone steps led down into darkness. Marcus grabbed his flashlight, the beam cutting through the black, and began to descend. The staircase was steep, carved into bedrock, going down at least 20 feet. The walls were stone, damp in places where groundwater seeped through. His boots scraped against grit and mineral deposits. At the bottom, the stairs opened into something that made his breath catch in his throat. The passage stretched ahead of him, not a room but a tunnel, hand-carved through solid rock. Support beams, old but solid, held up the ceiling every 10 feet. The walls showed pick marks from whoever had dug this, evidence of backbreaking labor done in secret. Marcus moved forward slowly, his flashlight beam bouncing off rough stone. The tunnel ran straight for about 30 feet, then curved to the right. He followed it, heart hammering. After another 20 feet, the tunnel opened into a chamber, and what Marcus saw there made him stumble backward, hand flying to his mouth. He stood frozen, unable to process what lay before him. The chamber was massive, at least 40 feet across and carved deep into the mountain, but it wasn't the size that stole his breath. It was what filled it. Wooden crates lined the walls, dozens of them, stacked carefully, labeled in German. In the center, covered with canvas tarps, were shapes, frames, sculptures, something large and rectangular. And against the far wall, metal shelves held rows of smaller boxes, each one labeled with numbers and dates. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across the space like a searchlight finding treasure in a shipwreck. He moved forward on legs that felt disconnected from his body. He reached the first crate, hands trembling so badly he could barely grip the crowbar he'd brought. He pried open the lid, wood splintering with age. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth that had somehow survived 70 years, were paintings. He carefully lifted one out, peeled back the protective layers with reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Even in the dim flashlight beam, the colors seemed to glow. Rich blues like midnight oceans, deep golds like sunset over wheat fields. It was a portrait of a woman, Renaissance era clearly, wearing elaborate jewelry, her eyes seeming to follow him with an expression that was both sad and knowing. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every fold of fabric painted with such precision it looked real enough to touch. No signature visible, but Marcus didn't need to be an expert to know this was museum quality. He rewrapped it with shaking hands and moved to the next crate. More paintings emerged from their cloth cocoons, landscapes that seemed to breathe, religious scenes that glowed with divine light, portraits of people long dead but brought to life through some artist's genius. Each one a masterpiece, each one potentially worth a fortune. Marcus walked the perimeter of the chamber, cataloging with growing disbelief. Sculptures in bronze and marble, religious icons encrusted with jewels that caught his flashlight like trapped stars, medieval manuscripts in glass cases that had somehow protected them from time itself. Against one wall, wooden chests sat in a row. He opened the first one. Gold coins spilled between his fingers, heavy and real and impossible. The next chest held jewelry, diamonds, emeralds, rubies set in elaborate pieces that spoke of wealth beyond comprehension. Another held silverware, ornate serving pieces with crests and monograms from families he'd never heard of. The canvas-covered shapes in the center called to him like sirens. Marcus approached them slowly, almost afraid that touching them would make everything vanish like a fever dream. He pulled back the first top. Beneath it, a painting so large it took up nearly 8 feet of wall space. A landscape with shepherds and sheep, pastoral and dreamlike, in a heavy gilt frame that had to weigh 200 pounds. The detail was breathtaking. Every blade of grass seemed individually painted. Every cloud carried the weight of real sky. He uncovered another, a religious scene showing saints with golden halos, so much gold leaf used in the painting that it looked like the canvas was on fire. The faces of the saints were rendered with such emotion that Marcus felt like they were watching him, judging him, asking him what he would do with what he'd found. A third painting showed nobility, a man in full armor sitting on a throne, a family crest visible in the upper corner. The armor looked so real Marcus thought if he reached out and touched it, his fingers would find cold metal instead of paint. He stepped back, overwhelmed. His flashlight beam swept across dozens more covered shapes. How many were there? 30? 40? More? Against the far wall, the metal shelving held smaller items. Marcus approached, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The boxes on the shelves were labeled with meticulous German handwriting, dates, locations, descriptions. He opened one. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a necklace that belonged in a crown jewels collection. He opened another, a religious artifact, a crucifix so old and ornate it had probably sat on an altar in some European cathedral for centuries. Marcus pulled out his phone, hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He tried to calculate, tried to comprehend. If even a fraction of this was authentic, if even some of it was legitimate, the value would be staggering. Millions, tens of millions, maybe more, much more. He thought of Edmund's letter. Wealth beyond measure waits below. The old man hadn't been exaggerating, not even close. Marcus sank to the cold stone floor, his back against the rough wall, and let reality crash over him like an avalanche. He'd come to this mountain to escape, to give Sophie a fresh start, to find some kind of peace in the quiet. Instead, he'd found a secret that could change their lives forever. Or destroy them. He didn't know which yet. Above him, muffled by 20 feet of rock and earth, he could hear Sophie's footsteps on the floor, her small feet padding across the kitchen. His daughter. His responsibility. His whole world. The little girl who still cried for her mother at night sometimes, who needed braces in a few years, who dreamed of going to college someday. And below him, buried in the mountain like a dragon's hoard, was enough wealth to give her everything. Private schools, medical care, a future without fear or want. Everything Emily and he had worked so hard for and never quite achieved. But Marcus knew, sitting there in the cold dark with a fortune surrounding him, that this wasn't just about money. Edmund's letter had made that clear. These weren't just objects. They were history. They were someone's stolen heritage. And if he took this wealth, if he used it for himself and Sophie, he'd be profiting from suffering he couldn't even comprehend. He stayed in that underground chamber for what felt like hours, just sitting, thinking, wrestling with a decision that felt too big for his shoulders. The silence down here was absolute, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own heartbeat, your own breath, your own conscience screaming in your ears. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, he stood. His flashlight beam swept across the chamber one more time, taking it all in. Then he turned and walked back through the tunnel, up the stone stairs, and into the basement. He closed the heavy door behind him, the lock engaging with a solid click. The key went back in his pocket, feeling heavier now than it had before. Upstairs, Sophie looked up from her homework, her green eyes so much like Emily's it hurt. "Did you fix what was broken, Daddy?" Marcus paused, considering the question. Fixed? No. He'd found something that would haunt him until he made a choice, the right choice. But he couldn't tell his 8-year-old daughter that. Not yet. "Not yet, baby," he said, his voice rough. "But I'm working on it." That night, after Sophie went to bed, clutching her rabbit and whispering goodnight to her mother's picture, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and Edmund's journal open beside him. He started cross-referencing dates and details with databases of stolen art from World War II. The more he searched, the sicker he felt. A landscape painting described in the journal matched a work reported stolen from a Jewish family in Vienna in 1938. A sculpture Edmund mentioned matched a piece taken from a museum in Prague in 1944. A religious artifact fit the description of something looted from a church in Poland in 1942. Not all of it was stolen. Edmund's careful notes made that clear. Some pieces he'd legitimately purchased before the war from collectors and galleries, documented sales with receipts. But enough of it had murky origins. Enough came from the wrong years, the wrong cities, the wrong circumstances, that Marcus couldn't pretend it was all innocent. He was sitting on what might be one of the largest recoveries of lost World War II art and artifacts in decades, maybe ever. The responsible thing, the right thing, was to contact authorities. But which authorities? The FBI? Some international art recovery organization? A museum? And what would that mean for him and Sophie? Would they lose everything? The house, the money he'd spent, their fresh start. He pulled up his phone and stared at Rachel's contact information. Emily's best friend, his friend now too, and a damn good criminal defense attorney. She'd know what to do, how to navigate this impossible situation, but calling her meant making it real. It meant setting in motion something he couldn't stop. His finger hovered over her name for a long time. Then he thought of Emily, of the night before she died when she'd come home from a particularly brutal shift at the hospital. A patient had coded, a young mother with 3 kids. They'd fought for 40 minutes but couldn't save her. Emily had cried in his arms and said something he'd never forgotten. "You know what the hardest part is? Knowing I did everything right, everything I could, and it still wasn't enough. But I'd rather fail doing the right thing than succeed doing something wrong." Marcus pressed call. Rachel answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. "Marcus, it's almost 1 in the morning. Is Sophie okay?" "Sophie's fine," he said quickly, "but I need your help, legal help, and I need you to promise me that what I'm about to tell you stays between us until we figure out what to do." There was a long pause, then Rachel's voice sharpened, her lawyer instincts activating. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" He took a breath that felt like it might be his last easy one for a while. "I found something in the house, something big, something that might be worth millions, maybe tens of millions, and I think keeping it might be illegal." "Marcus," Rachel's voice was careful now, measured. "What exactly did you find?" So he told her. Everything. The locked door, the German vault lock, the key hidden in the metal box, Edmund's letter, the tunnel carved into the mountain, the chamber filled with art and gold and artifacts. He talked for almost 30 minutes while Rachel listened, making occasional sounds of disbelief. When he finished, the silence on the other end stretched so long he thought the call had dropped. Finally Rachel spoke, and her voice carried a weight that made his stomach drop. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. You do not touch anything else in that chamber. You don't move it, photograph it beyond what you've already done, or tell anyone else about it. Not yet. Rachel, if I turn this over, if you don't turn this over," she interrupted, her tone sharp, "and this gets out somehow, you could be charged with possession of stolen property, concealment, maybe trafficking. I know you need money, God knows I understand that better than anyone. But Marcus, this isn't a suitcase full of cash you found. This is international. This is historical. And based on what you're describing, this is probably worth more than you can even imagine." "How much are we talking about?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know. He heard Rachel typing, researching even as they spoke. "If what you're describing is accurate, if even half of it matches items on stolen art registries, we could be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus, this could be one of the biggest finds in art recovery history." The number hit him like a physical blow. Hundreds of millions, not just enough to help him and Sophie, enough to live like royalty for generations. "What do I do?" he asked, and his voice sounded small and lost even to his own ears. "You give me until tomorrow evening," Rachel said. "Let me make some calls to people I trust, people who handle these kinds of cases, art crime specialists, maybe someone at the FBI's art crime team. We need to understand what you're legally obligated to do and what rights you might have." "Rights? As the property owner who discovered this in good faith, you might be entitled to finder's fees, rewards from insurance companies, compensation from museums. I can't promise anything, but there are precedents. People who've done the right thing and been compensated for it." Marcus felt a tiny spark of hope flicker in his chest. "How long do I have to decide?" "To decide what?" Rachel asked gently. "Whether I can live with myself either way." He heard her sigh, a sound full of sympathy and understanding. "Marcus, you've already decided. That's why you called me at 1 in the morning instead of Googling how to sell stolen art on the black market. You know what the right thing is. You're just scared, and you have every right to be. But Emily didn't raise Sophie alone for 5 years while you were deployed. She didn't work herself to exhaustion at that hospital. She didn't live her whole life with integrity just so you could teach your daughter that money matters more than morality. The words hit like hammer blows, each one true. "I'll give you until tomorrow night," Rachel continued. "Then I'm making calls whether you're ready or not. Because if something happens to you or Sophie, because you're sitting on $350 million in stolen treasure and the wrong people find out, I'll never forgive myself." 350 million. The number made the room spin. "How did you come up with that number?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Quick research while you were talking," Rachel said. "If you've got what you say you've got, that's a conservative estimate. Marcus, you didn't just buy a house. You bought someone's secret. And secrets this big, they're dangerous." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from his laptop screen and the distant glow of stars through the windows. He thought about what he'd tell Sophie, how he'd explain that the fresh start he'd promised her might turn into something else entirely, how he'd help her understand that sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing everything. But then he remembered Sophie's question earlier. Did you fix what was broken? And he realized that what was broken wasn't the house. It was the world that had allowed these treasures to be stolen in the first place. It was the families torn apart by hatred and greed. It was the heritage stripped away and hidden in the dark for 70 years. He couldn't fix all of that, but maybe, just maybe, he could fix a small piece of it, even if it cost him everything. Marcus pushed back from the table and walked to Sophie's room. He stood in the doorway watching her sleep, her chest rising and falling with the easy rhythm of childhood dreams. She'd kicked off her blankets again, one arm flung over her head, the other clutching that worn rabbit Emily had given her. In the moonlight filtering through the window, she looked so much like her mother it made his chest ache. He thought about the life he could give her with that money. The best schools, travel, experiences, security that would last her whole life and beyond. Everything a father wants for his child, but he also thought about what he'd be teaching her if he kept it. That you could profit from suffering if no one caught you. That money mattered more than integrity. That the rules didn't apply if you were smart enough or desperate enough. Would Emily want that for their daughter? Would he? Marcus pulled Sophie's blankets back up gently, tucked them around her small frame, and whispered into the dark room, "I'm going to do the right thing, baby. Even if it's the hard thing, even if it means we never get everything I want to give you. Because that's what your mom would do. And I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing that some things matter more than money." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, and left her to her dreams. Back in his own room, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the photo of Emily from the nightstand. It had been taken at a hospital fundraiser, her in a simple black dress, her smile radiant, her eyes full of life and purpose. "I hope I'm strong enough to do this," he told her picture. "I hope you're proud of me when it's over. And I hope wherever you are, you can help me be the man Sophie needs me to be." The house settled around him, wood creaking as it cooled in the mountain night. Somewhere deep below, 20 feet of rock and earth away, a fortune waited in the dark. A fortune that could change everything, a fortune that he would give away. Because Marcus Holloway, a widowed carpenter barely making ends meet, had discovered something more valuable than gold or jewels or priceless art. He'd discovered that integrity wasn't just something you had when it was easy. It was something you fought for when it cost you everything. And tomorrow, he would start fighting. For what was right. For the families who'd lost everything. For the legacy Emily had left behind. And for Sophie, who deserved to grow up knowing her father was a man who chose honor over wealth, even when the choice broke his heart. The morning light came too early, slicing through the bedroom window and pulling Marcus from a sleep that had been more like drowning than rest. His dreams had been filled with tunnels that went on forever, paintings with eyes that followed him, and Emily's voice asking questions he couldn't answer. He dragged himself out of bed, every muscle aching like he'd been in a fight, which in a way he supposed he had been, wrestling with his conscience all night. Sophie was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, carefully packing her lunch for school. She'd grown so independent over the past 2 years, too independent for an 8-year-old, learning to do things for herself because her father had been drowning in grief and barely functional. The guilt of that hit Marcus fresh every morning. "Morning, baby," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Morning, Daddy," she replied, not looking up from arranging her sandwich just so in the container. "Did you sleep okay? I heard you walking around last night." Marcus's chest tightened. Of course she had. The house wasn't that big, and he'd paced for hours after talking to Rachel, wearing a path between the kitchen and the living room, trying to process what he'd found, what it meant, what came next. "Just couldn't shut my brain off," he said, which was true enough, thinking about all the work that needs doing on the house. Sophie looked up at him with those 2 wise eyes. "Is it bad? The house, I mean. Are we going to have to leave?" "No, sweetheart," Marcus said quickly, kneeling beside her chair. "We're not leaving. This is home now, I promise." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded, accepting his word the way children do when they desperately want to believe their parent can fix anything. "Okay. Can Lily come over after school Friday?" "Yeah, of course." Marcus forced a smile. "We'll make pizza." After he dropped Sophie at school, watching her small backpack disappear through the doors of Crested Butte Elementary, Marcus sat in his truck for a long time. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. He could drive away right now. Pack up Sophie, leave the house and everything in it behind, pretend he'd never found that door, never opened it, never seen what lay beneath. But he knew he wouldn't. Couldn't. Whatever was down there had become his responsibility the moment he'd turned that key. He drove back to the chalet slowly, the mountain roads winding through pine forests that had stood for centuries, indifferent to human drama. The house looked peaceful in the morning light, smoke curling from a neighbor's chimney in the distance, snow beginning to dust the higher peaks. It looked like the fresh start he'd promised Sophie. It looked like a lie. Marcus unlocked the front door and stood in the entryway, listening to the silence. Then he walked to the basement stairs and descended. The locked door stood exactly as he'd left it, solid and ancient and keeping its secrets. But now he had the key. Now he had knowledge. Now he had a choice to make. He pulled the iron key from his pocket, inserted it in the cross-shaped lock, and turned. The mechanism engaged with that same heavy clunk, and the door swung open, exhaling cold air that smelled of stone and time and things long buried. Marcus flipped on his heavy-duty worklight, the kind he used for construction jobs, and descended the stone steps. This time, knowing what waited below didn't make it less overwhelming. If anything, seeing it again in better light made it worse. The tunnel stretched ahead, hand-carved through solid rock, support timbers holding back the mountain's weight. Someone had spent months, maybe years, excavating this passage in secret. The labor alone was staggering. Marcus walked slowly, his work light illuminating pick marks in the stone walls, places where whoever dug this had hit harder rock and had to chisel through inch by inch. After 30 feet, the tunnel curved right, just as he remembered. Then it opened into the first chamber, the one he'd discovered last night. But this morning, with better light, he could see details he'd missed. The wooden crates weren't just stacked randomly. They were organized, labeled with German words he didn't understand, and numbers that might be dates or catalog codes. The paintings under tarps had been arranged by size, the largest against the back wall, smaller ones in graduated rows. This wasn't a hasty hiding place. This was a carefully curated collection, preserved with thought and intention. Marcus moved to the nearest crate and carefully pried it open again. Inside, the paintings were wrapped not just in oiled cloth, but in multiple layers. Silk first, then waxed canvas, then the oiled cloth, each layer designed to protect against moisture and decay. Whoever had hidden these hadn't just thrown them underground, they'd tried to preserve them for the future. He unwrapped one painting he hadn't examined closely last night, a landscape showing the Dutch countryside, windmills in the distance, farmers working fields rendered in such detail he could almost smell the earth. The style looked 17th century, Golden Age Dutch masters. If it was authentic, it could be worth millions on its own. Marcus rewrapped it with trembling hands and moved to another crate. More paintings emerged, religious scenes glowing with Renaissance light, portraits of nobility frozen in oils and time, still lifes so realistic the fruit looked good enough to eat. Each one a masterpiece, each one someone's heritage. He walked the perimeter of the chamber more carefully now, cataloging with growing horror and awe. Against one wall, bronze sculptures stood on wooden pallets, religious figures, mythological scenes, pieces that belonged in museums not buried under a Colorado mountain. Medieval manuscripts in sealed glass cases had somehow survived 70 years underground, their illuminated pages still vibrant with gold leaf and mineral pigments. The wooden chests he'd opened last night held even more than he'd realized. Not just gold coins, but entire sets of them, collections that numismatists would kill to study. Jewelry that had adorned queens and duchesses, silverware engraved with royal crests, religious artifacts encrusted with gems that caught his work light like captured fire. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, slowly turning, trying to comprehend the scope. This wasn't just a collection. This was a museum's worth of artifacts. This was history itself, packed into crates and hidden away. Then he noticed something he'd missed in his shock last night. At the far end of the chamber, partially hidden behind stacked paintings, was another opening. A second tunnel. His heart rate kicked up. How far did this go? How much was down here? Marcus squeezed past the paintings and into the second passage. This tunnel was shorter, maybe 20 feet, and it opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but no less shocking. This room had been set up as a workshop. A long wooden table stood in the center, covered with tools, brushes, solvents, magnifying glasses, conservation equipment. Shelves lined the walls holding supplies, special papers, archival boxes, chemical compounds whose labels were in German. Edmund hadn't just hidden the collection, he'd maintained it. Along one wall, filing cabinets stood in a neat row. Marcus approached them with a sense of inevitability, knowing what he'd find but dreading it anyway. He pulled open the first drawer. Inside, folders were organized alphabetically, each one containing documentation, bills of sale, provenance records, photographs, letters. He pulled out a folder at random, labeled Vermeer, Girl with a Pearl Earring, Provenance Unknown. Inside were photographs of a painting he didn't see in the chamber, letters in German discussing its authenticity, and a note in English in Edmund's handwriting. Sold to private collector, 1952. Original seized from Goldstein family, Amsterdam, 1942. Family status, deceased, Auschwitz. No known heirs located. Marcus's hands shook as he read. Edmund had tracked what he'd done with each piece. Some he'd kept, some he'd sold, but he'd documented everything, creating a record of guilt or maybe redemption. He pulled out another folder. Rembrandt, Portrait of a Man, current location, Chamber A, Crate 7. This one included the original bill of sale from 1938, a legitimate purchase from a gallery in Berlin before the war. But stapled behind it was a note. Gallery owner murdered, 1943, painting seized by Nazi officials, recovered from abandoned storehouse, Munich, 1946. Marcus spent the next hour going through folders, each one a story of art saved or stolen or bought or bartered in the chaos of war and its aftermath. Some pieces had clean provenance, legitimate purchases from willing sellers. Others had murky histories, transferred through multiple hands in transactions that might or might not have been legal. And some, too many, had notes indicating they'd been seized from Jewish families, stolen from museums, looted from churches. Edmund had documented it all with meticulous German precision. For each piece, he'd noted where it came from, how he'd acquired it, what he knew about its original owners, and in cases where families had been killed, their fate. It was like reading a ledger of the Holocaust written in paintings and gold. At the back of one filing cabinet, Marcus found Edmund's personal journals, a dozen leather-bound volumes spanning decades. He carried the most recent one back to the workshop table and sat down on a wooden stool that had probably been there since the 1950s. The journal's last entry was dated 3 months before Edmund's death. "I am 89 years old now. My hands shake too much to hold a brush. My eyes can barely read my own writing. I know my time is short, and I have failed in the one task I set for myself 70 years ago, to return what was stolen. I told myself for decades that I was waiting for the right time, that the political climate wasn't safe, that I needed to be careful. But the truth is simpler and more shameful. I was afraid of prosecution for my role in moving this art, even though I saved it from destruction. Afraid of losing the comfortable life I built with the proceeds from the pieces I sold. Afraid of being seen for what I truly was. Not a savior, but a coward who profited from genocide while telling himself he was preserving history." Marcus's throat tightened as he read Edmund's confession. "I came to America in 1947 with nothing but 2 suitcases and enough guilt to fill an ocean. I had been an art dealer in Munich, buying and selling to anyone with money, not asking too many questions about where pieces came from or who was being forced to sell. When the war ended and I saw what had been done, saw the camps, saw the scale of the destruction, I couldn't pretend anymore. I spent 2 years tracking down art that had been scattered, stolen, hidden. I told myself I would return it all, that I would make amends. Instead, I brought it here, to this mountain, and I buried it like my shame." The next pages described how Edmund had spent decades building this underground vault, working at night when no one could see, hauling out dirt and rock handful by handful, reinforcing the tunnels, creating a space that could preserve the art indefinitely. He'd sold a few pieces over the years, always carefully, always through intermediaries, generating enough money to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. The rest he'd kept, maintained, catalogued, and justified to himself as preservation. "I told myself I was protecting these pieces until the world was ready to receive them," Edmund had written. "But the world has been ready for 70 years. I was never ready to face what I'd done. And now I'm out of time." The final entry was barely legible, written with a shaking hand. "To whoever finds this, I can only offer my documentation and my apology. I saved art that would have been destroyed, but I also profited from the suffering of millions. I don't know if what I did was preservation or theft. Perhaps it was both. The choice of what to do with this collection now falls to you. I pray you have more courage than I did. The code to the secondary vault is 32471918. May God have mercy on us both." Marcus stared at the numbers. Secondary vault? There was more? He stood up, legs unsteady, and looked around the workshop chamber. The walls were stone, solid, no obvious doors or openings beyond the tunnel he'd come through. Then he noticed something. One section of wall looked different, slightly smoother than the rest, less ancient. He approached it and ran his hands across the surface. His fingers found a seam, nearly invisible, running in a rectangle about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. At the bottom corner, hidden in shadow, was a small electronic keypad. It looked new, installed within the last decade, probably. The LED display glowed faintly red. Marcus pulled out Edmund's journal and checked the numbers again. 32471918. His finger hovered over the keypad. Did he want to know what else was down here? Did he want more weight on his shoulders, more moral complexity, more treasure to be responsible for? But he'd come this far. He pressed the numbers. The keypad beeped twice, the LED turned green, and he heard a mechanism engage inside the wall. The section of stone swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing not more tunnel but a room. A modern room, lined with climate-controlled display cases and LED lighting that flickered on automatically. Marcus stepped inside and his breath stopped. This wasn't a storage chamber. This was a gallery. The walls were lined with paintings, each one properly mounted and lit, each one a masterpiece he recognized even with his limited art knowledge. A Monet showing water lilies floating in dreamy light. A Van Gogh landscape with that distinctive swirling sky. A Klimt portrait dripping with gold leaf and sensuality. A Picasso from his blue period, all melancholy and genius. These weren't just valuable, these were iconic. These were pieces that museums around the world thought were lost forever or stolen or destroyed. Against one wall, glass cases held smaller treasures. Fabergé eggs that had belonged to Russian royalty, ancient Greek sculptures, medieval crowns, illuminated manuscripts from monasteries that no longer existed. In the center of the room, a single display case held something that made Marcus's knees weak. Stacks of cash, but not just any cash. Vintage bills, some from the 1930s and 40s, some from foreign countries that no longer existed, and beside the cash, gold bars stamped with Nazi eagles, the kind seized from countries they'd conquered, melted down from jewelry and religious artifacts stolen from millions. This wasn't just art. This was blood money. This was the actual physical evidence of genocide transformed into wealth. Marcus backed away from the display case, his stomach churning. He understood now why Edmund had never turned this over, why he'd lived his whole life guarding this secret. Returning the art was one thing, but the gold, the cash, the physical evidence that he'd profited from the Holocaust? That would have meant prison, ruin, shame beyond measure. Edmund had built a beautiful prison for himself and never found the courage to unlock the door. On a small desk in the corner, Marcus found one more journal, this one much thicker than the others. He opened it and realized it was a complete catalog of everything in both chambers, every painting, every sculpture, every artifact, with detailed provenance research, estimated values, and notes on rightful ownership when it could be determined. The final page showed a total calculation written in Edmund's shaking hand. Total estimated value of collection, adjusted for current market, $350 million approximately. Items with clear rightful owners or heirs, 200 pieces. Items with unclear ownership, 98 pieces. Items with legitimate provenance, 42 pieces. May God forgive me for the 42 I kept when I should have kept none. $350 million. Rachel's estimate had been exactly right. Marcus sat down hard on the floor, his back against the climate-controlled wall, surrounded by more wealth than most people could imagine in 10 lifetimes. He thought about what $350 million could do. Sophie's entire future, secured. The best education money could buy. Medical care, travel, experiences, opportunities. He could help other families, too, the ones like his, struggling after loss. He could fund scholarships, support hospitals, make a real difference. But he could only do those things with blood money, with art stolen from murdered families, with wealth built on genocide. The math was simple and terrible. Taking this money meant profiting from the Holocaust. Keeping quiet meant letting families die without ever knowing their heritage had survived. Turning it over meant losing everything, might even mean legal trouble he couldn't afford, might mean Sophie losing the one parent she had left. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus sat in that underground gallery for hours, the LED lights casting everything in a cool, museum-quality glow that made the art look even more beautiful and the choice even more impossible. He thought about Emily and what she would say if she could see him now, surrounded by treasure and paralyzed by conscience. She'd been so clear about right and wrong, so certain in her convictions. When a patient couldn't afford their medication, she'd helped them apply for assistance programs even though it meant hours of paperwork on her own time. When the hospital cut corners on staffing, she'd filed complaints even though it made her unpopular with administration. She'd never chosen the easy path when the right path was visible. But Emily had never faced a choice like this. She'd never had to weigh her child's future against abstract notions of justice for people long dead. Or maybe that wasn't fair. Maybe the choice was exactly the same. Do the right thing, even when it costs you everything. Marcus finally stood, his legs stiff from sitting on cold stone, and walked slowly around the gallery one more time. He stopped in front of the Monet, letting his eyes trace the brushstrokes that had been applied by a genius over a century ago. Someone had owned this painting once, had hung it in their home, had loved it. That family had probably been murdered for being Jewish, and their painting had been seized along with everything else they'd owned. Now it hung in a secret gallery under a mountain, seen by no one, appreciated by no one, its beauty wasted in the dark. That seemed wrong in a fundamental way. Art was meant to be seen, to move people, to connect humanity across centuries. Hiding it, even to preserve it, was a kind of death. He moved to the display case with the Nazi gold bars and stared at them with something like hatred. These bars represented melted-down lives, wedding rings, religious artifacts, dental fillings pulled from corpses. Keeping them, spending them, would be like reaching back through time and shaking hands with murderers. But turning them over might mean Sophie growing up without a father if the legal system decided he was complicit somehow. The fear was real and visceral. He'd seen how the justice system worked, how good intentions got twisted, how desperate people got crushed by circumstances beyond their control. What if they didn't believe he'd just discovered this? What if they thought he'd known all along, that he'd bought the house specifically because he knew what was underneath? What if they decided to make an example of him? Marcus pulled out his phone and called Rachel, even though it was barely noon and he'd told her he'd wait until evening. She answered immediately. "Marcus? What's wrong?" "There's more," he said, his voice hollow. "More than I told you last night. A second chamber, climate-controlled, modern. Rachel, it's like a museum down here. Monet, Van Gogh, Picasso, pieces I recognize from documentaries about lost art, and Nazi gold, actual Nazi gold bars." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "How much more are we talking about?" "Edmund's catalog says 350 million total, maybe more depending on the market. Rachel, I'm terrified. What if turning this over means they think I'm involved somehow? What if I lose Sophie?" "Marcus, listen to me." Rachel's voice was firm, her lawyer tone that meant she was thinking fast and strategically. "You discovered this innocently. You bought the house legally at auction. You're coming forward voluntarily within days of the discovery. That's not the behavior of a criminal, that's the behavior of a good man in an impossible situation. But the gold makes this even more important to report immediately," she interrupted. "That's literal Nazi plunder. There are international treaties about this stuff. Marcus, I know you're scared. I know this feels overwhelming, but you can't keep this secret. It's too big, too dangerous, and honestly, someone else probably knows about it." That thought hadn't occurred to him, and it sent ice through his veins. "What do you mean?" "Edmund lived here for decades. You think nobody ever wondered what he was doing? Why he bought property in the middle of nowhere? Why he lived so modestly when he occasionally sold pieces worth millions? Someone knows something, even if they don't know the full scope. And if word gets out before you report it, you lose all credibility." Marcus slumped against the wall. "So what do I do?" "You let me call the FBI art crime team today right now. You cooperate fully. You show them everything Edmund documented. You make it clear you want to do the right thing and that you're asking for guidance, not permission. And then we pray that the system sees you for what you are, a hero, not a criminal." Hero. The word felt ridiculous. He didn't feel heroic. He felt terrified and small and completely out of his depth. What about Sophie? Sophie is going to be okay, Rachel said gently. I promise you, Marcus, I will not let anything happen to that little girl. But you have to trust me. You have to do this the right way. After they hung up, Marcus stood alone in the underground gallery, listening to the soft hum of the climate control system keeping the art perfectly preserved. He thought about Edmund, spending decades maintaining this collection, updating his catalog, installing modern preservation equipment, all while knowing he'd never have the courage to reveal it. What a lonely existence that must have been, living with wealth he couldn't use, surrounded by beauty he couldn't share, carrying guilt that never lightened. Marcus refused to end up like that, refused to let this secret consume him the way it had consumed Edmund. Even if doing the right thing meant losing everything, at least he'd be able to look his daughter in the eye and tell her he'd tried. At least Emily would be proud of him, wherever she was. He turned off the gallery lights, closed the hidden door, and made his way back through the tunnels and chambers to the basement stairs. When he emerged into the normal world, the afternoon sun streaming through windows felt surreal, too bright, too normal for what he'd just experienced. He locked the vault door and put the key in his pocket. Then he went upstairs and did the most normal thing he could think of. He made himself a sandwich and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, staring out at the mountains that had hidden Edmund's secret for so long. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. FBI Art Crime Team will be there tomorrow morning at 10. Agent Victoria Chen, she's good people, worked Holocaust restitution cases for years. Be honest with her. Show her everything. You're going to be okay. Tomorrow morning, less than 24 hours before his life changed irrevocably. Marcus finished his sandwich, though he tasted nothing, then walked outside onto the deck. The pine forests stretched endlessly, snow beginning to accumulate on the higher peaks, the world vast and indifferent to human drama. He thought about the families who'd owned the art in his basement. Thought about parents watching their children being taken away, knowing they'd never see them again. Thought about the moment when soldiers came and stole their paintings, their jewelry, their heritage. Thought about the decades of searching by survivors and descendants who never stopped hoping they'd find something, anything that proved their families had existed, had mattered, had owned beauty before it was stolen. And he thought about Sophie, who would come home from school in 2 hours full of stories about her day, about Lily and the science project they were planning, about the book they were reading in class. She'd want help with her homework, and she'd want to play outside in the first snow. She'd want normal things from her normal dad in their normal life. Except nothing was normal anymore. Nothing would ever be normal again. When Marcus picked Sophie up from school that afternoon, she bounced into the truck with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about her day. He drove home slowly, memorizing this moment, this last day before everything changed. After dinner, homework done and dishes washed, they sat together on the couch watching a nature documentary about wolves. Sophie curled against his side, her rabbit clutched in one arm, slowly getting drowsy. "Daddy?" she murmured. "Yeah, baby? Are you scared about something?" The question hit him like a punch. How did she always know? "What makes you ask that?" "You keep squeezing me like you think I'm going to disappear. And you're not watching the TV, you're just staring." Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, memorizing the weight of her against him. "I'm not scared exactly. More like, I have to do something hard tomorrow, something important, and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out." Sophie twisted to look up at him, her green eyes serious. "Is it the right thing?" "I think so. I hope so." She nodded, satisfied. "Then it'll be okay. Mom always said if you do the right thing, even if it's hard, you can sleep at night." Marcus's eyes burned. "Your mom was a smart lady." "I know." Sophie yawned and snuggled back against him. "That's why we should listen to her." They finished the documentary, though Marcus couldn't have said what it was about. Then he carried Sophie upstairs, tucked her in, and sat beside her bed until her breathing evened out into sleep. He stayed there for a long time, watching her in the dim light from the hallway, this perfect small person he'd made with Emily, this living reminder of a love that death couldn't erase. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever came next, he had to protect her, not with money or treasure or stolen art, with integrity, with the example of choosing right over easy. That was the only inheritance that mattered. Later, lying in his own bed staring at the ceiling, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling back to the chambers below, to the $350 million in art and gold, to the families who'd died never knowing their heritage survived, to Edmund who'd lived 70 years in a prison of his own making. Around midnight, Marcus got up and went to the kitchen. He made coffee, though he didn't need the caffeine, just needed something to do with his hands. He pulled out Edmund's personal journals and read them cover to cover, following the old man's journey from art dealer in Munich to guardian of stolen treasure in Colorado. Edmund had been 26 when the war ended, young and idealistic and horrified by what he'd seen. He genuinely believed he was saving art from destruction, from being melted down or burned or lost forever. For the first few years, his journal entries were full of determination to return everything. But then months turned to years, and years turned to decades, and the weight of what he carried got heavier while his courage got smaller. "I told myself I would wait until it was safe," Edmund had written in 1963. "But I think the truth is I'm waiting until I'm brave enough, and I never will be." Marcus understood that feeling now. The terror of exposure, of consequences, of losing everything. But he also understood something Edmund had never figured out. Sometimes the only way to be free was to open the cage yourself. At 3 a.m, Marcus went down to the basement one last time. He unlocked the vault door and descended into the chambers. He walked through both rooms, past crates of paintings and sculptures and treasures, through the workshop where Edmund had spent thousands of hours maintaining a collection he'd never share, into the climate-controlled gallery where masterpieces hung in the dark. He stood in front of the Monet and spoke aloud, his voice echoing off stone walls. "Tomorrow they're coming. The FBI, art experts, people who can trace ownership and return what was stolen. I'm giving all of this back. Not because I'm brave, I'm terrified, but because keeping it would mean living like you did, Edmund, in a beautiful prison, and I won't do that to myself or Sophie." The painting didn't answer, but Marcus felt something shift inside him, some tension finally releasing. The decision was made. The path was set. Whatever came next, he'd face it knowing he'd chosen integrity over wealth. He'd chosen Emily's values over easy money. He'd chosen to be the father Sophie deserved. Marcus turned off the gallery lights, sealed the hidden door, and walked back through the tunnels for the last time as the only person who knew the secret. Tomorrow the world would know. Tomorrow his life would change forever. But tonight, for the first time in days, he thought he might actually sleep. Because Emily had been right. If you do the right thing, even when it's hard, you can sleep at night. And Marcus Holloway was so very tired of being awake. Morning came with heavy clouds rolling over the mountains, the kind that promised snow by afternoon. Marcus woke before his alarm, his body rigid with anxiety, knowing that in just a few hours FBI agents would arrive and his secret would become the government's business. He made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, using the early morning hours before Sophie woke to do what he should have done days ago. Research Edmund Castellano properly. The obituary had been sparse, almost deliberately so. But Marcus was a contractor, used to tracking down property histories, permits, previous owners. He knew how to dig. He started with property records, tracing the chalet's ownership backward. Edmund had purchased the land in 1948 for almost nothing, just raw mountain acreage that nobody wanted. He'd built the chalet himself over the next 2 years, pulling permits for a modest 2-bedroom structure. But Marcus noted something odd. Edmund had also pulled permits for a root cellar and cold storage that showed dimensions far larger than what a single man would need. That's when he dug the tunnels, Marcus realized. Right from the beginning, hidden in plain sight as a root cellar, Edmund had been building his vault. Marcus searched for Edmund's name in art databases, gallery records, anything that might explain who this man had been before Colorado. For hours, he found nothing. Edmund Castellano seemed to have materialized in America in 1947 with no past, no history, no trail. Then Marcus tried a different approach. He searched for variations of the name in European records and finally found something that made his blood run cold. Edmund Kastel, art dealer, Munich, Germany, active 1935 to 1946. The photograph attached to an old gallery catalogue showed the same face from Edmund's journals, younger but unmistakable. He'd changed his name when he came to America, Germanizing Castel to the Italian-sounding Castellano, hiding in plain sight. Marcus clicked through to a historical archive of Munich art dealers during the Nazi period. What he found made him feel sick. Edmund Castell's gallery had been investigated after the war by the Monuments Men, the Allied task force dedicated to recovering stolen art. The investigation had concluded that while Castell had done business with Nazi officials, he'd also helped several Jewish families liquidate their collections before fleeing Germany, paying fair prices when other dealers were stealing outright. The file noted, "Subject appears to have operated in moral gray area. Some evidence of assistance to persecuted families, but also evidence of profiting from forced sales. Insufficient evidence for prosecution. Subject left Germany before final determination." A moral gray area. That's what Edmund had been, not a hero, not a villain, but something more complicated. Someone who'd helped when he could, but who'd also profited from desperation and genocide. Marcus found more pieces of the puzzle as dawn broke. A 1946 article from a displaced persons camp newsletter mentioned Edmund Kastel helping track down art stolen from Jewish families, working with survivors to document what had been taken. A 1947 customs record showed Edmund entering New York with personal effects and art materials, value under $1,000. He'd lied on his customs declaration, obviously, or maybe he'd shipped the collection separately, in pieces, over months or years. However he'd done it, Edmund had brought a fortune in stolen art into America right under the government's nose. Sophie's footsteps on the stairs pulled Marcus from his research. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her unicorn pajamas, hair wild from sleep, rubbing her eyes. "Why are you up so early, Daddy?" "Couldn't sleep, baby." Marcus closed his laptop quickly. "Want some pancakes?" They made breakfast together, Sophie chattering about how Lily's mom had said yes to the playdate Friday, how they were going to build a snow fort if it snowed enough. Normal 8-year-old concerns. A normal morning. Except in 3 hours, FBI agents were coming, and nothing would be normal ever again. After Marcus dropped Sophie at school, he drove back toward the chalet but took a detour through downtown Crested Butte, the small historic district with its colorful Victorian buildings and ski shops. He needed coffee, needed to clear his head before the FBI arrived. He parked and walked into the local cafe, a place called Mountain High Coffee that he'd been meaning to try. The interior was warm and rustic, smelling of fresh roasted beans and cinnamon rolls. Marcus ordered a large black coffee and was waiting at the counter when he noticed the man at a corner table watching him. Not casually glancing, but actively staring, eyes locked on Marcus with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The man was maybe 50, thick-build, wearing an expensive North Face jacket that looked brand new, out of place among the locals in their worn Carhartt and flannel. When Marcus made eye contact, the man didn't look away, just kept staring. Marcus grabbed his coffee and left quickly, that same feeling he'd had in the army when something wasn't right, when danger was close. He glanced back through the cafe window as he reached his truck. The man was on his phone, still watching. Marcus's hands trembled as he started the engine. Coincidence, he told himself, just a tourist, except something deep in his gut said otherwise. He drove home through winding mountain roads, checking his rearview mirror constantly. No one followed, but that didn't ease the knot in his stomach. By the time he pulled up to the chalet, it was 9:30. The FBI would be here in 30 minutes. Marcus went inside and paced, unable to sit still, unable to focus. He kept thinking about that man in the cafe, those cold eyes watching him. How would anyone know? Unless Edmund had told someone before he died. Unless someone else had been watching the property. Unless word had already leaked somehow. At exactly 10 o'clock, 2 black SUVs pulled up the gravel drive. Marcus's heart hammered as he watched from the window. Rachel's car arrived right behind them. She'd driven up from Denver at dawn to be here. 4 people emerged from the SUVs. 2 men in suits, 2 women, 1 in casual clothes, and 1 dressed like Rachel, clearly lawyers or agents. Rachel walked up to the house first and knocked, even though Marcus was already opening the door. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "No," Marcus admitted. "But I'm ready." Special Agent Victoria Chen introduced herself first, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Her partner, Agent Michael Reyes, was younger, maybe 35, with the alert watchfulness of someone trained to notice everything. The other 2 were Dr. Sarah Morrison, an art historian specializing in World War II looted art, and Amanda Foster from the State Department's Cultural Heritage Division. They all showed credentials, all professional and courteous, but Marcus could feel the weight of their authority. These were people who could destroy his life with a phone call if they decided he was complicit. "I want to cooperate fully," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I found something under this house that I think belongs to other people. I want to do the right thing." Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. "That's why we're here, Mr. Holloway. To help you do exactly that." Marcus led them down to the basement, Rachel staying close to his side, her presence a comfort. He unlocked the vault door and let it swing open, revealing the stone steps descending into darkness. "How far down does this go?" Agent Reyes asked. "About 20 feet, Marcus said. "Then it opens into tunnels. 2 chambers total, plus a workshop. I'll show you." They descended single file, their flashlights creating a procession of bobbing lights in the darkness. When they reached the first chamber and Marcus turned on his work lights, he heard sharp intakes of breath, muttered curses of disbelief. Dr. Morrison walked to the nearest crate like someone in a trance and carefully opened it. When she pulled back the wrapping and saw the painting inside, she actually gasped. "Oh my God, this is a Cézanne. I've seen photographs, but it's been missing since 1943. She looked at Marcus with something between awe and horror. "Mr. Holloway, do you have any idea what you've found?" "The previous owner's journals estimated $350 million, Marcus said quietly. "But it's not about the money. Some of this was stolen from families during the Holocaust. I want to give it back." The next 4 hours were a blur of documentation. The FBI team photographed everything. The art historian examined pieces with a jeweler's loupe and made extensive notes. The State Department representative made phone calls in hushed tones. When Marcus showed them the workshop with Edmund's meticulous files, Dr. Morrison actually sat down hard on the floor, overwhelmed. "He documented everything," she whispered, flipping through folders. "Every piece, every source, every transaction. This is unprecedented." Agent Chen stood beside Marcus as they watched the team work. "Mr. Holloway, I want to be very clear about something. Based on everything we've seen, you've done nothing wrong. You bought this property legally, you discovered this collection by accident, and you contacted authorities immediately. You're not in trouble." "Then why do I feel like I am?" Marcus asked. Chen's expression was sympathetic. Because this is overwhelming, and because I suspect you're a good man struggling with an impossible situation. But I promise you, we're not here to punish you. We're here to help recover what was stolen and to make sure you're protected in the process." "Protected from what?" Rachel asked sharply, her lawyer instincts activated. "From people who might not want this collection to become public," Chen said carefully. "Edmund Castellano lived here for 70 years keeping this secret. He may have told someone. He may have had buyers lined up for certain pieces. There are people in the black market art world who would kill for access to a collection like this." Marcus thought of the man in the cafe, those cold, watching eyes. "I think someone might already know," he said, and described what had happened that morning. Agent Reyes immediately pulled out his phone. "We're going to station agents near your daughter's school until we know what we're dealing with, and we'll have someone watching this property 24/7. "You think Sophie's in danger?" Marcus's voice rose, panic flooding through him. "I think we take every precaution," Chen said firmly. "Mr. Holloway, you've just discovered one of the largest finds of stolen World War II art in history. Until this is secure and public, you and your family are vulnerable." The FBI team worked until early afternoon, cataloging and photographing every piece they could access. By the time they finished the preliminary assessment, their estimates had grown. "We're looking at well over $400 million, Dr. Morrison said, her voice still shaky with disbelief. "And that's conservative. Some of these pieces are considered lost masterworks. Museums have been searching for them for 80 years. Agent Chen pulled Marcus aside before they left. "We're going to need a few days to coordinate with international agencies, Interpol, Holocaust restitution organizations, museums. This is going to go public within a week, maybe sooner. You need to be prepared for media attention, Mr. Holloway. Your life is about to change dramatically." "I just want Sophie to be safe," Marcus said. "And I want these things to go back to the families they were stolen from." "We'll make both of those things happen," Chen promised. "But you need to be very careful until then. Don't talk to anyone about this. Don't let anyone into this house. And if you see anyone watching you or following you, you call me immediately." She handed him a card with her direct number. After they left, Marcus and Rachel sat in the living room in stunned silence. Through the window, Marcus could see an unmarked car parked down the road, FBI agents keeping watch. "This is really happening," he said. Rachel squeezed his hand. "You did the right thing, Marcus. Emily would be so proud of you." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "What if someone tries to hurt Sophie to get to this collection? What if I've put her in danger by not just keeping quiet?" "You put her in more danger by keeping quiet," Rachel said firmly. "If you'd tried to hide this, eventually someone would have found out. The black market would have come calling. This way, the FBI is protecting you. This way, you're on the right side of the law." Marcus picked Sophie up from school that afternoon with an FBI agent following at a discreet distance. She bounced into the truck, oblivious to the danger, chattering about her day. He drove home slowly, checking mirrors constantly, hyper-aware of every car, every person, every shadow that might be a threat. That evening, while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Holloway?" The voice was male, accented, European maybe. "My name is Viktor Sokolov. I'm an art dealer based in Geneva. I understand you've come into possession of certain items that might interest my clients." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please don't insult my intelligence," Sokolov said smoothly. "Edmund Castellano and I had an arrangement for many years. I helped him move pieces discreetly. Now that he's gone, I assume you'd be interested in continuing that arrangement. My clients pay very well, Mr. Holloway, much better than any museum or government agency." "I'm not interested," Marcus said, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "Good evening, Mr. Holloway, but consider carefully. The FBI can offer you finder's fees, maybe a few $1,000,000 if you're lucky. My clients can offer you $50 million, cash, untraceable. Think about your daughter. Think about her future." The line went dead. Marcus immediately called Agent Chen and told her about the call. "We'll trace it," she said. "And Mr. Holloway, this confirms what we suspected. Someone in Edmund's network knows about the collection. You need to be extremely careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't let Sophie out of your sight." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching the road, jumping at every sound. Around 2 in the morning, he saw headlights approaching slowly. A car rolling past the house without stopping, just cruising by like someone casing the place. Marcus called the FBI agents watching the property. "We saw it," Agent Reyes confirmed over the phone. "We're running the plates now. But Mr. Holloway, I think you and your daughter need to relocate temporarily, just until this goes public and the collection is secured." "Leave our home?" Marcus asked. "I just bought this place. We're supposed to be starting over here." "I understand," Reyes said. "But your safety comes first. We can put you in a secure location for a few days, just until the press conference." The press conference. Agent Chen had mentioned they were planning to announce the discovery publicly within the week, hoping that public exposure would provide protection. Once the world knew about the collection, trying to steal it or intimidate Marcus would be pointless. But until then, he and Sophie were vulnerable. The next morning, Marcus told Sophie they were going on an adventure, that Aunt Rachel had invited them to stay at her house in Denver for a few days. Sophie was excited, packing her stuffed animals and favorite books, completely unaware that they were fleeing for their safety. As Marcus loaded their bags into the truck, he noticed a man standing at the edge of the property line, partially hidden behind trees. Not the man from the cafe, someone different, younger, watching. Marcus's heart pounded. He hustled Sophie into the truck and drove away fast, the FBI agents falling in behind them. In his rearview mirror, he saw the watcher pull out a phone. They were being monitored, tracked. Rachel's house in Denver was a fortress by comparison, a gated community with security and cameras. She'd taken time off work to help Marcus navigate this nightmare. That afternoon, while Sophie watched movies in Rachel's guest room, Marcus sat with Rachel and Agent Chen in the dining room, going through Edmund's documentation in detail. "We've identified 68 pieces with clear connections to families or institutions," Dr. Morrison said via video call, her face on Rachel's laptop. "The Goldstein Monet, the Rothschild Vermeer, pieces from the Dresden Museum, from churches in Poland and Czechoslovakia. We've already started reaching out to descendants and institutions." "What about the pieces without clear ownership?" Marcus asked. "Some will go to museums in their countries of origin," Chen explained. "Others, if they were legitimately purchased by Edmund before the war, may legally belong to his estate, which means they default to you as the property owner." Marcus shook his head. "I don't want them, even the legitimate ones. Edmund spent his whole life hiding from his guilt. I won't profit from his collection, no matter how clean the provenance looks." Rachel spoke up. "Marcus, you need to think practically here. If there are 40 or 50 pieces with legitimate ownership and you're the legal owner, you could be looking at tens of millions of dollars. Sophie's future doesn't need to be built on Holocaust art," Marcus interrupted. "Even the legal pieces come from that world, that time. I can't take them." "Then donate them to museums," Dr. Morrison suggested. "Establish a foundation for Holocaust education in your wife's name. Use the money to help other families search for stolen heritage. There are ethical ways to handle this, Mr. Holloway, ways that honor both your integrity and Emily's memory." That idea resonated. Marcus thought about it, turning it over in his mind. Not keeping the money for himself, but using it to do good, to help others. That felt right in a way that simply taking it never could. Over the next 3 days, while Marcus and Sophie stayed at Rachel's house, the investigation progressed rapidly. More pieces were identified, more families contacted. The stories that emerged were heartbreaking and beautiful. Dr. Morrison called one afternoon with news that made Marcus cry. We found the family of the Monet owner, Mr. Holloway. Eva Goldstein, she's 83, living in Tel Aviv. Her father was the only survivor of her family. He spent his entire life searching for that painting because it was the last thing he remembered from his childhood home before they were taken to the camps. He died 5 years ago, never knowing it had survived. "Can we return it to her?" Marcus asked, his voice thick. "We can," Dr. Morrison confirmed. "Thanks to you." Marcus sat in silence for a long time after that call, Sophie playing with Rachel's cat nearby, oblivious to the weight of history being lifted. He'd done the right thing. Whatever happened next, whatever he lost or gained, he'd done the right thing. On the 4th day of hiding at Rachel's house, Agent Chen called with news. "We're going public tomorrow. Press conference at 11 a.m. at FBI headquarters in Denver. We'd like you there, Mr. Holloway. The world should know that you chose to do the right thing." "Will we be safe after?" Marcus asked. "Safer than you are now," Chen said. "Once this is public knowledge, there's no point in trying to steal the collection or intimidate you. The whole world will be watching." That evening, Marcus sat Sophie down and tried to explain what was happening in terms an 8-year-old could understand. "Remember how I told you I found something special in the house?" Sophie nodded, her green eyes serious. "Well, it turns out those special things belonged to other people a long time ago, people who had them stolen during a war. And tomorrow, we're going to tell everyone that we're giving them back to the families they belong to." "Even though they're worth a lot of money?" Sophie asked. "Even though," Marcus confirmed, "because doing the right thing is more important than having a lot of money." Sophie thought about this for a moment, then said, "Mom would say that's good. She always said helping people is better than having stuff." Marcus pulled her into his arms, this wise little girl who understood more than he gave her credit for. "Your mom would be very proud of you, Soph, and I hope she's proud of me too." "She is," Sophie said with the absolute certainty of a child. "I know she is." That night Marcus couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation, nervousness about speaking publicly, about the media attention that would follow, but also, underneath all that, a sense of peace he hadn't felt since Emily died. He was doing something that mattered. He was honoring her memory in the most profound way he could, by choosing integrity over wealth, by putting others before himself, by teaching Sophie through action what real courage looked like. The next morning, as Marcus put on the one suit he owned and helped Sophie into her nice dress, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. He looked different somehow, not just tired, but changed, stronger maybe, more certain. Rachel drove them to FBI headquarters, the agents who'd been protecting them forming an escort. As they pulled into the parking garage, Marcus saw news vans already gathering, cameras being set up, reporters checking their notes. This was really happening. Agent Chen met them in the lobby and led them to a conference room where they could wait before the press conference. "Are you ready?" she asked Marcus. "No," he admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." She smiled. "That's the definition of courage, Mr. Holloway." At exactly 11 o'clock, they walked into the press conference room. Cameras flashed, reporters called out questions. The room buzzed with energy. Agent Chen approached the podium first and began speaking, her voice calm and authoritative. "Today, the FBI is announcing the recovery of one of the largest collections of stolen World War II art ever discovered. Over 400 pieces, valued conservatively at $420 million, have been found in a private residence in Colorado. These items were hidden for 70 years by Edmund Castellano, who died 6 months ago. The discovery was made by Marcus Holloway, who purchased the property legally and immediately contacted authorities upon finding the collection." The room erupted with questions. Chen held up a hand for silence. Mr. Holloway could have kept this discovery quiet. He could have sold pieces on the black market for enormous profit. Instead, he chose to do the right thing, knowing it might cost him everything. Because of his integrity, families who lost everything during the Holocaust will be reunited with pieces of their heritage. Museums will recover lost masterworks. History will be preserved and honored. She gestured for Marcus to join her at the podium. His legs felt like they might not hold him, but he walked forward anyway, Sophie's hand tight in his. "Mr. Holloway, would you like to say anything?" Chen asked. Marcus looked out at the sea of cameras and reporters, took a breath, and spoke from his heart. "My wife Emily died 2 years ago. She was a nurse and she spent her life helping people, even when it was hard, even when it cost her. When I found this collection, I thought about what she would do. And I knew she'd say that some things matter more than money. These pieces belong to families who suffered unimaginable loss. Returning them doesn't undo that suffering, but maybe it provides some small measure of justice, some proof that beauty can survive even the darkest evil. I'm not a hero. I'm just a dad trying to teach his daughter that integrity matters." His voice cracked on the last words. Sophie squeezed his hand tighter. The questions came fast after that, reporters shouting over each other, cameras flashing constantly. But Marcus had said what he needed to say. Agent Chen took over, providing details about the collection, about the repatriation process, about the international cooperation already underway. Afterward, in the quiet of the conference room, Rachel hugged Marcus tightly. "You did it. You actually did it." "What happens now?" Marcus asked, suddenly exhausted. "Now?" Rachel smiled. "Now the world sees you for who you really are. And now you start rebuilding your life, knowing you made the right choice." Marcus looked down at Sophie, who was playing with the hem of her dress, still processing everything. "Hey, Soph." She looked up. "Are you proud of your old man?" Sophie smiled, that same smile Emily used to give him when he'd done something good. "Yeah, Daddy, I'm really proud." And in that moment, surrounded by FBI agents and lawyers and the chaos of a press conference, Marcus Holloway finally felt like he could breathe. He'd faced an impossible choice and chosen integrity over wealth. He'd honored Emily's memory and taught Sophie a lesson worth more than $400 million. Whatever came next, whatever the future held, he could look at himself in the mirror and know he'd done the right thing, even when it cost him everything. And that was worth more than all the treasure in the world. The press conference exploded across every major news outlet within hours. By evening, Marcus's face was on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN's homepage. The headlines varied, but the story was the same. Widowed father chooses integrity over $420 million fortune. Colorado man discovers Nazi-looted art, immediately contacts FBI. Holocaust art recovery, the carpenter who did the right thing. Marcus sat in Rachel's living room that night watching himself on the news, Sophie asleep against his shoulder, and felt completely surreal. That man on the screen being called a hero, talking about integrity and his late wife, that couldn't be him. He was just Marcus Holloway, a carpenter who'd barely been keeping it together, who'd bought a cheap house hoping it would save his grieving daughter. "You're trending on social media," Rachel said, scrolling through her phone. #1 worldwide. People are calling you the real Captain America." Marcus groaned. "I don't want to be famous. I just wanted to do the right thing." "Well, you are," Rachel said gently. "And Marcus, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get bigger before it gets smaller." She was right. By morning, their location at her house had leaked somehow. News vans lined the street outside. Reporters camped on the lawn. Rachel had to call the police to clear them back. "We need to go home," Marcus said, watching the circus from behind closed curtains. "Sophie needs normalcy. We can't hide here forever." Agent Chen arranged a security detail to escort them back to the chalet. The drive through the mountains felt like a parade, news helicopters following them from above, reporters in cars trying to keep pace. When they finally arrived at the property, Marcus found FBI vehicles everywhere, a command center set up in trailers near the house, armed guards stationed at the perimeter. "Is all this really necessary?" Marcus asked Chen, who'd driven up to meet them. "For now," she said. We've had 3 separate attempts by black market dealers to access the property since the press conference. And Mr. Holloway, I need to warn you, you're going to get offers, lots of them. People offering money to write your story, to make movies, to give interviews. My advice is to say no to all of it until things settle down. Over the next 2 weeks, while federal authorities worked to authenticate and catalog the entire collection, Marcus tried to maintain some semblance of normal life for Sophie. She went to school with an FBI agent following at a distance, which made her simultaneously proud and embarrassed. Her classmates thought it was cool at first. Then, kids being kids, they mostly just wanted to play and forgot about the whole thing. Marcus was grateful for childhood's short attention span. The authentication process was painstaking. Teams of art historians, conservators, and provenance researchers descended on the Chalet, working 16-hour days in the underground chambers. Each piece had to be examined, documented, compared against stolen art registries, traced back through layers of history to determine its origin and rightful ownership. Dr. Sarah Morrison became a fixture at the house, arriving every morning with her team, descending into the vault, emerging late at night exhausted but exhilarated. One evening she sat with Marcus on the deck while Sophie played in the yard with Scout, the German shepherd puppy they'd finally gotten, FBI agents having decided a protective dog was a good idea. "This is the find of a lifetime," Dr. Morrison said, her voice filled with awe. "I've been studying looted art for 20 years, and I never thought I'd see something like this. Your Edmund Castellano, he was meticulous. His documentation is making our job so much easier." "He wasn't my Edmund," Marcus corrected gently. "He was just a man who made complicated choices and lived with the consequences." "Aren't we all?" Morrison said. She pulled out her tablet and showed Marcus photographs. "I wanted you to see this. This is Eva Goldstein." The photo showed an elderly woman with white hair and kind eyes, standing in what looked like an apartment in Tel Aviv. She was holding a photograph, and in that photograph was a young girl standing in front of the Monet that had been hidden in Edmund's vault. "That's Eva as a child," Morrison explained, standing in her family's home in Amsterdam in 1941, a year before they were taken to the camps. Marcus's throat tightened. "You're returning the Monet to her?" "Next week. We're flying it to Tel Aviv with full security. Eva's asked if she could meet you, Mr. Holloway. She wants to thank you in person." "I didn't do anything special," Marcus protested. "You gave her family back their history," Morrison said firmly. "That's everything." The stories kept coming, each one a testament to the weight of what Marcus had found. The Rothschild Vermeer was being returned to descendants in London. A collection of religious artifacts stolen from Polish churches was going back to Warsaw. Medieval manuscripts were being repatriated to Czech museums. Family after family, institution after institution, receiving pieces of themselves they thought were lost forever. But not everything had clear owners. As the authentication process continued, it became apparent that 43 pieces in the collection had been legitimately purchased by Edmund before the war, with clean provenance and no connection to theft or forced sales. And under property law, since Edmund had died without heirs and Marcus had legally purchased the estate, those pieces now belonged to Marcus. Agent Chen sat him down one afternoon to explain the legal situation. "Mr. Holloway, the legitimate pieces are conservatively valued at $68 million. They're yours. You can keep them, sell them, donate them, whatever you choose. $68 million. The number still had the power to make Marcus dizzy. He thought about what that kind of money could do: pay off every debt, secure Sophie's entire future, live without worry for the rest of his life. But he also thought about Edmund, who'd had wealth and spent 70 years in a prison of his own making. "I want to create a foundation," Marcus said, "in Emily's name. The money from those pieces, it goes into a foundation that helps families search for stolen heritage, that funds Holocaust education, that provides scholarships for children who've lost parents. I'll keep enough to fix up this house properly and put some away for Sophie's college, but the rest goes to doing good." Rachel, who was present for the meeting, squeezed his shoulder. "Emily would love that, Marcus." "There's more," Agent Chen said. "Several insurance companies have paid out claims over the years for pieces you've recovered. They're offering combined finder's fees of $12 million, and 3 major museums have offered substantial rewards for pieces being returned. We're looking at another $8 million there. $20 million, plus the $68 million from the legitimate pieces. $88 million total." Marcus felt lightheaded. "The foundation gets most of it," he said firmly. "I want to keep maybe $5 million for Sophie and me. The rest goes to helping people." "You're sure?" Chen asked. "Because, Mr. Holloway, you're entitled to all of it, legally and morally." "I'm sure," Marcus said. Money was never the point. Over the next months, as spring turned to summer in the Colorado mountains, Marcus's life transformed in ways he'd never imagined. The Emily Holloway Foundation was established with $50 million in initial funding. Rachel agreed to serve as president of the board, with Dr. Morrison and several Holocaust survivors joining as advisors. The foundation's mission was threefold: help families search for stolen art and heritage, fund Holocaust education programs, and provide scholarships to children who'd lost parents. The first scholarships were awarded to 6 high school students who'd lost parents to violence, illness, or military service. Sophie attended the ceremony, sitting in the front row, watching her father present awards in her mother's name. Afterward, she hugged him tight and whispered, "Mom's watching, Daddy. I know she is." The chalet underwent extensive renovations. Marcus hired contractors, though he did much of the work himself, pouring his grief and hope into every board he sanded, every wall he painted. The house transformed from a rundown relic into a warm, beautiful home. Large windows brought in mountain light. The stone fireplace became the heart of the living room. Sophie's bedroom got the purple paint she'd wanted and built-in bookshelves Marcus constructed by hand. They kept the master bedroom simple, but added Emily's paintings on the walls, her presence woven into the fabric of their new life. Marcus found himself talking to her photos less like grief and more like sharing news with someone he loved. "We did it, Em," he'd say. "We chose right." The basement was sealed. The FBI had removed every piece of the collection, documented everything, and filled in the tunnels with concrete for safety. Where the vault door had been, Marcus installed a wine cellar, something normal and innocent. He never wanted to go underground again. But he kept one thing: Edmund's final journal, the one with the confession and the apology. He kept it as a reminder that everyone faces impossible choices and that it's never too late to try to make things right. Crested Butte, the small mountain town that had been slowly dying as ski tourism declined, suddenly found itself on the international map. The town that housed Nazi treasure brought curious tourists at first, then historians, then people genuinely interested in the story of redemption and restitution. The local museum created an exhibit about the discovery, about Edmund's complicated legacy, about Marcus's choice. They used reproductions of some of the found art with explanations of where each piece had gone. Schools brought field trips. The exhibit became one of Colorado's most visited attractions. Property values rose. New businesses opened: a bookstore, art galleries, restaurants. The town that had been forgotten was suddenly thriving, not because of the treasure itself, but because of the story it represented, the story of doing the right thing. Marcus found himself giving talks sometimes, at schools or community centers, never for money, always because someone asked and he felt he owed it to Emily's memory to spread the message. He wasn't a natural public speaker, often fumbling his words, but people seemed to respond to his authenticity. "I'm not special," he'd always start. "I'm just a guy who lost his wife and found a secret and had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be, what kind of father I wanted my daughter to see." He'd talk about Emily, about her dedication to helping others, about how she'd worked herself to exhaustion because she believed nursing was a calling, not just a job. He'd talk about standing in that underground vault, surrounded by treasure, knowing that keeping it would mean betraying everything she'd stood for. The hardest choices define us, he'd say, not the easy ones. Sophie grew over that year, becoming more confident, more herself. The shy, grief-stricken little girl was still there sometimes, usually late at night when she missed her mother. But increasingly, Marcus saw a strong, opinionated, fiercely moral child emerging. She started a fundraiser at school for the foundation, organizing bake sales and art auctions, leading with a determination that reminded Marcus so much of Emily it hurt. "I want to help people like Daddy helped people," she told anyone who would listen. Marcus couldn't have been prouder. 8 months after the press conference, Eva Goldstein came to visit. She was 83, frail but vibrant, escorted by her grandson David, a doctor from Tel Aviv. Marcus met them at the Denver airport, nervous about meeting someone whose family's tragedy had been so intertwined with his discovery. But Eva embraced him at baggage claim, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Thank you," she whispered in accented English. "Thank you for giving me back my father's memory." They drove to the chalet together, Eva marveling at the mountain landscape. "My father spent his whole life searching," she said. "Every art dealer, every museum, every lead. He never stopped believing that painting had survived, that somewhere his childhood home still existed in that image. He died still searching." "I'm sorry he never got to see it returned," Marcus said. "But he knew," Eva said firmly. "Somewhere he knew. And now I have it, hanging in my living room where it belongs. My grandchildren can see it, my great-grandchildren. The painting that witnessed our family's joy before the darkness came." She stayed for 3 days, and in that time, Marcus learned about the Goldsteins, teachers, musicians, shopkeepers in Amsterdam who'd loved art and culture and life. All murdered except Eva's father, who'd survived Auschwitz as a teenager and spent the rest of his life trying to reclaim some piece of what was lost. On her last evening, Eva and Marcus sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Sophie was inside doing homework, Scout at her feet. "Your wife," Eva said. "Emily, tell me about her." So Marcus did. He told her about Emily's laugh, about how she could never pass a homeless person without giving them something, about how she'd worked double shifts to help pay for a coworker's cancer treatment, about the way she'd looked at Sophie like she was the most precious thing in the universe. "She sounds like someone who understood what matters," Eva said. "She did," Marcus agreed. "And I hope I'm teaching Sophie the same thing." Eva took his hand in her papery one. "You are. By your choices you teach. And Marcus, what you did, returning these pieces, you've given so many of us something we thought we'd never have. Proof that our families mattered, that their lives had meaning, that beauty can survive even when everything else is destroyed. That's a gift beyond measure." After Eva left, Marcus felt a shift inside himself. The heavy weight he'd been carrying since finding the vault, the constant second-guessing and fear and uncertainty, it began to lift. He'd made the right choice, not just theoretically, not just in the abstract, but really, concretely, changeably. Eva's peace proved it. The Foundation's work proved it. Sophie's pride in him proved it. Fall came again to the mountains, 1 year since Marcus and Sophie had first arrived. The chalet was finished, every room warm and welcoming. The town was thriving. The Foundation was helping dozens of families. And Marcus Holloway was no longer the broken widower barely holding on. He wasn't healed exactly. Grief didn't work that way. He still missed Emily with an ache that could take his breath away. Still found himself reaching for his phone to call her before remembering. Still slept on his side of the bed, leaving her space empty. But the grief had transformed from something that drowned him to something he could carry. Something that reminded him to live well, to honor her memory through action. One October afternoon, exactly 1 year after he'd first unlocked the vault door, Marcus stood in his workshop in the garage, building a bookshelf for Sophie's room. His hands moved with practiced ease, measuring, cutting, sanding. The work was meditative, grounding. Sophie burst in, home from school, Scout bounding after her. "Daddy, guess what? I got an A on my history project about the foundation." Marcus smiled, putting down his saw. "That's great, baby. I'm proud of you." "And Mrs. Henderson said I should enter it in the state competition. She said our story could teach other kids about integrity." Our story. Not his story, but theirs. Marcus pulled her into a hug. "What do you think about that?" "I think Mom would want us to share it," Sophie said seriously, "so other people know that doing the right thing matters." That evening, after dinner and homework and Sophie's bath, Marcus tucked her into bed, surrounded by her books and stuffed animals. The bookshelf he was building would go against that wall, he decided. More room for the books she devoured. "Daddy?" Sophie said sleepily. "Yeah, Soph? Are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about it, really thought about it. "Yeah, baby, I think I am. Not the same way I was when Mom was alive, but happy in a new way, proud of us, of what we've built here." "Good," Sophie said, yawning, "because I'm happy too. I miss Mom, but I'm happy." Marcus kissed her forehead, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, this miracle child who'd survived loss and came out stronger. "I love you, Sophie. Love you too, Daddy." Later, Marcus stood on the deck under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. The mountains stood eternal around him, keeping their secrets, holding their beauty. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. Emily's death, the desperate move to Colorado, finding the vault, the impossible choice, the year of transformation that had followed. He'd come to this mountain broken, looking for a place to hide from grief. Instead, he'd found purpose. He'd found a way to honor Emily's memory that mattered more than any memorial service or gravestone. He'd taught Sophie that integrity wasn't just a word, but a way of living, and he'd discovered that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest peace. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Foundation board meeting next week. We're approving 10 new scholarships. You should be so proud, Marcus. Emily would be over the moon." He texted back, "She'd say we're just getting started." And it was true. The foundation's work was just beginning. There were still families searching for lost art, still children who'd lost parents and needed support, still stories of the Holocaust that needed to be taught so the world would never forget. The $83 million that Marcus could have kept for himself was now funding that work, creating ripples of good that would extend far beyond his lifetime. The chalet that he'd bought for $85,000, thinking it was just a house, had turned out to be so much more. It was a test of character, a crucible that had transformed him from a grieving widower barely functioning into a man with purpose and peace. It was proof that you could do the right thing even when it cost everything, and that sometimes, somehow the universe rewarded that kind of courage. Not always with money, though in his case that had come too, but always with the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know you'd measured up when it mattered. Marcus went back inside, locked the door, and walked through his home. Their home, his and Sophie's and Emily's memory. He paused at the mantel, looking at Emily's photo from Sophie's 5th birthday party, her smile frozen in time. "We did good, Em," he whispered. "I hope wherever you are, you're proud of us." And standing in the warm house they'd built on the foundation of an impossible choice, Marcus Holloway felt her answer in his heart. She was. A year and a half after the discovery, Marcus gave his last major interview. A documentary crew had been following the repatriation process, filming families being reunited with their heritage, museums reclaiming lost masterworks, the foundation's work helping search efforts. The director wanted to end the film with Marcus's reflections. They set up cameras in the living room, That same room where Marcus had first wrestled with his choice. Sophie sat off camera, doing homework but listening. "So, Mr. Holloway," the interviewer asked, "if you could go back to that moment when you first opened the vault and saw the treasure, would you do anything differently?" Marcus thought about it, really considered. "No," he finally said, "because every choice I made after that moment led to this." Sophie seeing that integrity matters more than money. Families like Eva Goldstein's getting pieces of their history back. The foundation doing work that will outlive me. Would my life be easier if I'd kept the money? Maybe. Would it be better? Absolutely not. What would you say to someone facing their own impossible choice? I'd say listen to the voice inside you that sounds like your best self. For me, that voice sounded like Emily, reminding me what we'd taught Sophie about right and wrong. And I'd say the temporary comfort of choosing wrong never outweighs the permanent weight of knowing you failed when it mattered. Any regrets? Marcus smiled. Only that Emily didn't get to see this, to see Sophie growing up so strong, to see the foundation doing good in her name. But maybe she does see it somehow. I like to think so. After the crew left, Sophie came and curled up next to Marcus on the couch. "That was good, Daddy. What you said about Mom." "You think she'd agree?" "I know she would," Sophie said with absolute certainty, "because you chose what she would have chosen. That's how love works. Even when someone's gone, you carry their values forward." Marcus marveled at his 10-year-old philosopher. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," Sophie said, snuggling closer. "From Mom and from you." The documentary premiered 6 months later and won awards, bringing renewed attention to the repatriation efforts and the Foundation's work. More families came forward with information about lost art. More students applied for scholarships. The ripples kept spreading. Marcus continued to live quietly, doing carpentry work when he felt like it, volunteering with the Foundation, raising Sophie. The media attention faded eventually, as it always does, and he was grateful. He'd never wanted to be famous. He'd just wanted to do right by Emily's memory and teach Sophie what mattered. On the 2nd anniversary of finding the vault, Marcus and Sophie hiked up to an overlook above the chalet. It was a clear fall day, the aspens blazing gold, the sky impossibly blue. They sat on a flat rock and looked down at their home, at the town beyond, at the mountains stretching to the horizon. "Mom would have loved this view," Sophie said. "She would have," Marcus agreed. "She loved the mountains, said they made her feel small in a good way, reminded her that her problems weren't as big as she thought." "Daddy?" Sophie said after a while. "Yeah, baby? Thank you for doing the right thing. With the treasure. I know it was hard." Marcus pulled her close. "You know what, Soph? It was hard at first. But now I can't imagine having made any other choice. Because if I had, I wouldn't be able to look at you and feel proud of the man I am. And that would have been the real poverty, not lack of money, but lack of integrity." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors so beautiful they seemed impossible. And Marcus Holloway, who'd come to this mountain 2 years ago broken and desperate, felt something he hadn't felt since before Emily died. Whole. Not healed. Maybe you never fully heal from that kind of loss. But whole in a different way. Complete in knowing he'd faced the hardest test of his life and passed. That he'd chosen integrity over wealth, community over comfort, legacy over luxury. That he'd taught his daughter through action what words could never convey. That character matters, that doing right defines us, and that love endures even death when we honor it through our choices. The chalet that was supposed to be a fresh start had become something more. It had become a crucible, a test, and ultimately a triumph. It had transformed a grieving widower into a man of purpose, a broken family into a testament to resilience, and a hidden treasure into a legacy of justice. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, Marcus and Sophie walked back down the mountain toward home. Toward the house that had held a secret and forced a choice. toward the life they'd built on the foundation of doing what was right even when it cost everything. And Marcus knew, with the certainty that comes from living through fire and emerging stronger, that some treasures can't be measured in dollars. The real treasure was Sophie's pride in her father. The real treasure was Eva Goldstein's tears of joy. The real treasure was the foundation doing good in Emily's name. The real treasure was the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know you chose integrity when temptation whispered. That kind of wealth, that lasted forever. Anyone can find treasure if they're lucky enough, but it takes real courage to understand that how we handle what we find defines who we are. As Marcus tucked Sophie into bed that night, she said something that made his eyes burn with tears. "I told Lily today that my dad is my hero. Not because he found treasure, but because he gave it away." Marcus kissed her forehead. "Your mom was the real hero, Soph. I'm just trying to live up to her example." "Then you're doing great," Sophie said, already drifting off to sleep. Marcus stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, this child who'd survived so much loss and emerged so strong. Then he walked to his room, to Emily's photo on the nightstand, and whispered into the darkness, "I hope you're proud, Em. I hope wherever you are, you know we chose right. We chose you, your values, your integrity, and we're going to keep choosing that way every day for the rest of our lives." The mountains stood silent witness outside his window, keeping their eternal watch. And in a small chalet in Colorado, a widowed father and his daughter slept peacefully, their hearts unburdened by guilt or greed, their consciences clear, their legacy secure, because they'd learned what Edmund Castellano never did, that the only treasure worth keeping is the one you earn through integrity. Everything else is just weight. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will move you. Click now to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe doing the right thing still matters in this world.